Thank you very much, everyone, and happy Sunday to all of you. Sunday morning, it's Sunday evening here in Jerusalem. The war in Gaza, like every war, presents an enormous amount of ethical dilemmas. By chance, yesterday, as probably most of you know, the Israeli army conducted a very brave, heroic rescue mission in which they brought home 4 Israeli hostages, 3 young men and 1 young woman. There remain 120 hostages in Gaza. According to Israeli official figures, 44 of them are believed to be dead. The numbers I hear, which are not official, are significantly higher. And as I've been saying since day one of the war, the longer the hostages remain in Gaza, the more there is a risk to their lives. And opposed to what the Israeli government is telling the people of Israel since the beginning of the war, that military pressure on Hamas will release the hostages, what we know to be a fact is that military pressure on Hamas is killing hostages. Yesterday's brave rescue mission by the Israeli army, in which they did manage to get 4 hostages out alive and well back to Israel, presents at least 2 ethical dilemmas, or 2 dilemmas. One of them is very ethical, the second one is less so. In the military operation, the Israeli commander of the force that led the operation was killed. In fact, he was buried an hour ago here in Jerusalem. So I think a dilemma of decision makers and military commanders and leaders is always, what are the risks are you willing to take when you send troops to meet the enemy? Here, there was a great deal of risk. The operation was planned for weeks. Israel had intelligence information, apparently with the help of the US intelligence, to pinpoint the location of 3 of the men hostages who were in one home in the Nusrat refugee camp in the center of Gaza, and the young woman who was in another home about 200 yards away from the first home. They deployed for this mission a very large number of troops, special forces, intelligence, and the risk was taken. The Israeli prime minister, the government, the military decided that the risk of the killing of the soldiers was secure enough to risk having soldiers go into harm's way to rescue Israeli citizens who are being held hostage in an enemy territory by an organization which is known to be brutal and murderous, as they proved themselves on October 7th of last year when they breached the Israeli borders and committed the atrocities, killing 1,200 Israelis at the time in one day. I don't think there's much of a dilemma here. I think it is a difficult decision for anyone holding responsibility for the lives of their soldiers to determine whether or not the mission is worth the risk. Here, they determined that it was, and as I said, the commander of the operation, the only Israeli who was killed in the operation, paid with his life in order to rescue the 4 Israeli hostages. It could have been a much higher price, because one of the forces that was sent to rescue the 3 men were caught in crossfire, and they could have been killed together with the hostages, but the end result was a miracle. And I don't think we can call it anything more than a miracle. The second dilemma is a very ethical dilemma, and it's one that I'll present here and open for discussion and thought. In rescuing the 4 Israeli hostages, it's reported that more than 200 Palestinians in Gaza were killed by the Israeli forces. They were killed on the ground in the crossfire. They were killed in the air from the Israeli Air Force when the vehicles escaping with the hostages were attacked by Hamas fighters. Gunfighter opened. The Hamas apparently used everything in their arsenal, including RPGs, and shot at the Israeli vehicles. They sent in more Israeli vehicles who were on standby waiting armored personnel carriers, and as I mentioned, the Israeli Air Force came in and bombed. And we don't know if the figure published by Hamas is accurate, if there were really 200 people killed. Hamas never publishes how many of the 200 were combatants and how many were non-combatants. We don't know. But from the visuals, from the pictures, from the film that haven't been on Israeli television, but I'm quite sure they've been probably filtered, but on CNN and MSNBC and CBS and other networks, certainly on the Arab networks, Al Jazeera and others, very vivid pictures of many people being killed, including women and children who were not combatants. So here's the ethical dilemma. Israel had 124 hostages remaining in Gaza. We're in the 8th month of the war. One of the two primary military aims of this war has been to return the Israeli hostages. A majority of the Israeli hostages, an overwhelming majority, are non-combatants, are civilians who were taken out of their homes or taken from a music festival. Only a minority of them were soldiers who were captured inside military bases, and they were captured on a Saturday, on a holiday, on Simchat Torah, dragged in their underwear out of their military bases into Gaza and been held hostage since. Now, Israel is a state which is a member of international organizations, a member of the United Nations, is supposed to adhere to international conventions of warfare. Hamas is recognized as a terrorist organization. It is not a state. It is not a member of the community of nations. It is not signed on to any international conventions and doesn't adhere to any conventions of warfare. The Israelis would claim that in the decision in killing people in order to rescue the hostages and protect the Israeli civilians, the Israeli soldiers, that the Israeli law on warfare, which is applicable here, is the one that talks about proportionality. These are one of these ridiculous notions of warfare, as if anything in war is ethical. But there are rules of war, there are laws of war, and one of the rules and laws of war is the concept of proportionality. It's not defined in international law on what is proportionality. How many civilians are you allowed to kill for each combatant? Some people here in Israel have said that the Israelis have looked at the American war in Iraq and the American war in Afghanistan, the British fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, and other democratic nations that have gone to war against Al-Qaeda or ISIS, and have calculated how many civilians were killed in proportion to how many combatants were killed. And Israel claims, and I don't know if this claim is right or not, that it is under the average number of non-combatant deaths in the Israeli war in Gaza, as opposed to the other democratic nations' wars against terrorist organizations. I have a lot of difficulty dealing with this whole notion of proportionality and what number of civilians is it okay to kill. What's called in English collateral damage. Just the concept of collateral damage is very disturbing to me. We're talking about human beings who are being killed, and they're called collateral damage. So this is the dilemma. I don't have an answer. I do know that it was a miracle that these 4 hostages came home. I know that the taking of hostages and the way that they're being treated in Gaza is against international law, which Hamas does not follow. Hamas committed war crimes in Israel on October 7th. Hamas has committed war crimes in Israel since it was established many, many years ago, more than 30 years ago. Is it ethical to not follow the rules of law of war when you're fighting a terrorist organization? You all have experiences in fighting Taliban, in fighting ISIS, in fighting Al-Qaeda, who committed 9/11. Where do you draw the line? What's ethical? What's right? What do you do? I know that there is no military solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I know that there is no military solution for dealing with Hamas, and Hamas has to be dealt with. Hamas can no longer rule the territory next to Gaza. There are only political solutions to these problems, to these conflicts. Political solution for dealing with Hamas and a political solution for dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in which we've been killing each other for more than 100 years. This has to be the last war between Israel and Palestine. We simply should not allow ourselves to tolerate another war. I mention this because a lot is in the hands of the United States. The United States could have ended this war months ago had it informed Israel that the last shipment of bombs was being sent to Israel. Is it ethical for the United States to prevent Israel from fighting against those who threaten to destroy it? I don't have answers. These are big dilemmas. These are big questions. And I think we weigh them not only on the basis of our values, but on the basis of realpolitik. There are evil people in this world. There are evil organizations in this world. There is terrorism. And those terrorists often seek to kill innocent people, non-combatants. Most of the people who were killed on October 7th, living in communities next to Gaza, the Gaza Strip, were peace activists, supported peace. They were part of the peace camp in Israel. Many of them had volunteered and had driven young Palestinian children to hospitals in Israel. Many of them were involved in groups that were dialogue groups with people in Palestine, in Gaza, and in the West Bank. They were attacked by their Palestinian neighbors. And it didn't matter to Hamas what their political identity was, if they believed in peace or they didn't believe in peace. One of my good friends, someone who I've known for 30 years and worked with, originally a Canadian citizen living in Kibbutz Be'eri, Vivian Silver, was murdered on October 7th. She was a peace activist her whole life, a feminist, a person who support for workers' rights and human rights and women's rights. And she was burned to death in her home, burned alive in her home. For the first couple of weeks of the war, we thought that she was a hostage in Gaza until forensic scientists found DNA from her ashes, and we learned that Vivian had been murdered on October 7th. So, was it right for Israel to bring home the hostages? I think yes. Is it justifiable to kill 200 people to save 4 hostages? Big question mark. There's a young woman in the Nusrat refugee camp who I've known for about a year and a half now. And she had an abusive husband, and I encouraged her to leave her husband. And she has been alone with her 1-year-old baby. Her baby is now 14 months old, I think, living in the refugee camp. And she had contacted me yesterday by WhatsApp and said, "We're being bombed. We don't know what's going on." I wrote to her that it's probably the Israelis found the location of some senior Hamas leaders and they were going after them. Excuse me. We learned later that it was this rescue operation that was all the bombing. And she wrote me later in the day that one of her cousins was killed, a young cousin, not a combatant. It becomes personal. That doesn't change the dilemma. So what I would like to do is end here and hear your voices, your opinions, what you think.
Wow, thank you. So let's start with Arthur, and then let's talk to some of the people on Zoom. So Arthur.
My question, Gershon, you said you didn't think there was a military solution, but how else will Hamas be eliminated other than militarily? And if that's the case, given how many civilians have been killed so far and how many more will have to be killed, do you think that that really eliminates Hamas in the long run? Or do you think that the longer this goes on, the more Hamas, whatever you want to call them, terrorists, will be created, and this will become an ongoing, endless conflict?
Yeah, there are very few things that I can guarantee you happening. And here are two things that I can guarantee will happen. The longer Israel remains in Gaza and the longer this war continues, the more armed insurgency against Israeli soldiers there will be, and the more Israeli soldiers will come back dead. I assure you this, 100% guarantee. The second thing I can assure you of is that the longer this war goes on and the more Palestinians are killed in Gaza, the stronger Hamas will be and the easier it will be for Hamas to recruit new recruits. Since 2008, Hamas has recruited its elite fighting force from the children of bereaved families whose fathers were killed, whose grandfathers were killed, whose brothers and sisters were killed, whose homes were bombed. And these people were told, indoctrinated in a very distorted view of Islam, that the primary commandment of your religion, of Islam, is to be a martyr for the cause of Palestine. And in becoming a martyr, you should kill as many of these Jews as you can. And as I said, I believe this is a distorted view of Islam, but this is the view of Islam held by Hamas and other jihadi organizations in the Middle East. Nonetheless, or perhaps because of that, there is no way to military defeat them, nor is there a way to create deterrence against them. And this is something I've been claiming in Israel, even on Israeli television and the media since 2008, that you cannot deter someone who believes that it's a commandment to die. What do? Threaten you're going to kill them? That's exactly what they want. The only defeat of Hamas is by offering the Palestinian people the alternative, which is the possibility of living in freedom and dignity. And we Israelis must understand that we will never have security until the Palestinians have freedom and dignity. And the Palestinians need to understand that they will never have freedom and dignity until Israel has security. There is an equation here, which is the basis of any political situation. There are two very strange things that have happened as a result of this war. One is that the two-state solution is back on the table. And quite frankly, over the last 3 or 4 years, I thought it was dead. I thought it was no longer viable. We've been talking about it for 30 years, and the Israeli occupation has deepened and widened, and more settlements have been built, and Palestinians have lost more and more freedom, and their government has become more and more corrupt, and their democratic rights have shrunken. But suddenly, as a result of this war, the two-state solution is back on the table. President Biden says it every other day. What President Biden doesn't do, that he should do, is immediately recognize the state of Palestine. Because if you support the two-state solution, you should recognize both states, not leave the Palestinians in hope, empty hope for 30 years, that they will eventually get sovereignty. The other surprising thing that happened as a result of this war is that on the night that Iran attacked Israel, a regional defense alliance emerged that was never negotiated. No agreements were written about it, but it wasn't only Israel that shot down Iranian missiles and rockets, but it was also Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. And this is where we have to look to in the future, because there are regional interests that make the promise of peace or the prospects of peace that much stronger. The only alternative to Hamas is, as an ideology, is offering the Palestinian people a better ideology, and that's the ideology that they can actually achieve peace and freedom and dignity. So that's my answer. We can't defeat Hamas with guns. We only make them stronger that way.
I see Ginger's hand raised. Ginger, can you unmute yourself?
You appear to be still muted.
Okay, I'm here. I'm usually I usually come to things like this from a very emotional point of view, and I'm trying to remain, a little bit, um, a little bit unemotional. Let's just start with that. So, as far as Hamas is concerned, we had a group the other day who met, and the topic was evil. And I thought of Hamas as evil. If you think of something as evil, you take away their humanity. There is no humanity left in seeing a terrorist group like Hamas or Hezbollah or ISIS or Al Qaeda. None of these groups have humanity. And I think that once we take this away, we can't see them as human. So if we don't declare ourselves to be in touch with a human being, and how do you negotiate with people who are evil? How do you navigate through a system that has taken away all their humanity, or they have done that themselves? So I question the ability, I mean, I know how hard you are working to attain peace in this area, but don't we first have to see each other as human beings and not look to taking away, for instance, killing all Jews? Where's the humanity in that? When you want to erase a particular group from the earth completely. I'm still trying to figure out that whole thing myself, but maybe I don't know where there's a question there. There is a question there. So I'm going to just stop here.
Yeah, let me just say that there are circumstances in life where we have to negotiate with evil because we have no choice. There are 120 Israelis hostages in Gaza. We have to negotiate with Hamas. There's no question about it. And my preference is to negotiate directly with them and not through third-party mediators. That's not the choice of the Israeli government, who demand to negotiate indirectly. Yes, Hamas demands to negotiate indirectly, not directly with Israel. It's very telling if you read the official statements, both of the Israeli side and the Hamas side, because they both use the same language, and it's not by chance. Israel calls Hamas Nazis. Hamas calls Israel Nazis. The same words. They use the same points of reference in history to denote the other side. There are evil people in Israel. There are evil politicians in Israel. Some of them are in the Israeli government. There's no doubt that Hamas is an evil organization led by evil people. The choices that we need to make is to have a strategy first that seeks to empower the good people, the people who want to live in peace, the people who believe in, given the opportunity to make peace, they would. Given the acknowledgement and the recognition that every person who lives in the conflict zone has the same right to the same rights, there can be no peace in a conflict where one side believes that it has more rights than the other side, where one side governs with a sense of superiority above the other side. So we need to set a strategic goal in which we prioritize empowering the moderates and the people who believe in dialogue and diplomacy and the people who recognize the humanity on the other side. And it is the power of that decision and the policies developed as a result of that decision that will disempower the evil people. There will be spoilers who will seek to destroy us. We had our prime minister assassinated by one of them, an Israeli Jew, who assassinated Yitzhak Rabin because he was an evil person living with an evil ideology. And there were evil people on the Palestinian side who blew themselves up in buses and cafes in order to seek what they call justice. But again, I repeat what I said before, these conflicts do not have military solutions. Maybe they used to. Destroying the Nazis and killing Hitler. Bringing Japan to its knees in World War II may have been an imperative to end the war. I don't know. I know that in today's world, in the 21st century, where a state is fighting against a non-state actor, there are no military solutions, only political ones.
Richard Coral, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Gershon. It's really a revelation when you come, and it's really we feel that we really have really being informed. My my first question was kind of answered earlier, but what always troubles me, and I'm trying to follow what's going on in the Middle East from this distance, but it always seems to be that the most radical voices control the floor, and the more moderate forces never can. Right now, the Israeli peace movement has been pretty much moribund, but from something from the Second Intifada, and we don't really see from this distance the moderate voices on the Arab side. We just don't see them really. We just see those who control the floor, control the budget, reward people who had martyrs in their families. So I guess the question is, where is the potential for this kind of dialogue that you're looking for? Where are the people who should step up and out voice the radical speakers? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good question. I think it is important to note that as we speak, we are facing two traumatized societies. For Israel, October 7th was the more Jews were killed in one place at one time at any time since the Holocaust. And Israeli society is stuck on October 7th. We haven't moved on. We're there. It's reminded to us every day. I just opened up the television before coming to speak to you, and there was someone repeating the story of what happened to them on October 7th. And certainly when over the weekend we saw the hostages come home, it's October 7th all over again. So we are traumatized. Palestinians, every Palestinian everywhere in the world, whether you live in Gaza or not, are re-experiencing the Nakba, the catastrophe that happened to them with the birth of Israel in 1948. The war in Gaza is the biggest trauma facing Palestinian society in 76 years. So perhaps it's not rational for us to expect from two traumatized societies for there to be loud voices for peace. Most Israelis and most Palestinians, who I believe want to live in peace, don't think it's possible. We're living in such deep trauma and pain that it's difficult to imagine peace. But they're there. I've been participating in demonstrations almost every Saturday night since the beginning of the war for the hostage families. And as of late, the demonstrations have become more and more vocal in Israel for bringing down the government, for calling for new elections, for holding Netanyahu and his government responsible for their failures, for their failure to protect the people of Israel, for their failure of not taking responsibility. I think it's important when we look for Arab voices that we also look not only in Palestine itself, where it's more difficult to find those voices. I'll remind you that Palestinians are not living under democracy. They don't have freedom of speech, not in the West Bank and not in Gaza, not even in Israel. Palestinian citizens of Israel, since October 8th, if they voice any kind of sympathy for Palestinians being killed in Gaza, they're arrested by the Israeli police. We are losing our freedom of speech in Israel as a result of this war. So it's difficult to expect people living in non-democratic societies to be vocal against popular public opinion or against their government. Those voices are there. Go to a website called ALMEP, ALLMEP, Alliance for Middle East Peace, almep.org, and you will see this umbrella organization of 150 Jewish and Arab, Israeli and Palestinian organizations working for peace and dialogue and understanding. I think it's important also to look at what's happening in countries like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, which are also not democratic countries, but those two countries have understood that in order to perceive, to develop, to imagine a future of peace in the region, they are working on changing their educational curriculum, removing anti-Semitism, removing attributes to Jews as being immoral, people who need to be killed. These changes are happening by officials in the regimes of the countries that surround us. Very advanced in the United Arab Emirates, where the president, Mohammed bin Zayed, has built in Abu Dhabi a multi-faith center for Christians, Jews, and Muslims, the believers of the monotheistic religions, a place where Jews, Christians, and Muslims can meet together and foster a belief in interfaith dialogue and understanding. So these changes are happening, but I can tell you also that the Palestinians that I work with most closely, and I work with a lot of Palestinians, are people who share my dream and my vision and my hope and my strategy of developing peace. It's out there. It's really difficult at this time to speak that language.
Thank you. I'm going to just have two more questions, one from the floor and one from Zoom land. So, Margaret.
Thank you so much. I was actually hesitant to come because, quite honestly, I have a mixture of emotions, but I'm thrilled with your input. Let me understand. Netanyahu was essentially on his way out before the 7th. I mean, there were so many people fighting against him. So tell me something. Do you see any opportunity for change politically in Israel? Actually, he's coming to the U.S. now, in a couple of weeks, which infuriates me. But just a question on Netanyahu leaving.
So, Netanyahu was not really on the way out before October 7th because he has a firm majority of 64 seats in the 120-member parliament in the Knesset. And his coalition is made up of his right-wing and ultra-Orthodox supporters. So his coalition was very solid, despite the fact that the majority of Israelis were taking to the streets in protest against the judicial overheaval that he was seeking to achieve to basically destroy the independence of our judiciary in Israel and to castrate our Supreme Court. Today, there are a majority of Israelis who are against Netanyahu. By all the polls, if there were elections today, he would not win. He would not have a majority. He would not be able to form a coalition. But even tonight, as we expect Benny Gantz, a former general and a person whose party joined the government in order to have responsible adults sitting around the war cabinet when October 7th happened, he's expected tonight to announce that their party is withdrawing from the government and will join the opposition once again. Netanyahu still has his majority of 64. And as long as he has that majority of 64, it'll be difficult, if not nearly impossible, to bring him down. But I expect that what will happen once Benny Gantz's party withdraws from the government is that the demonstrations today in Israel every Saturday night, which are numbered in the 100,000s, will rise to 1 million and maybe more. And there'll be demonstrations not just on Saturday night, but on all days and weeks, all days and evenings of the week. And we will see the Israeli people in much larger numbers taking to the street, calling for a deal with Hamas to bring home the hostages and new elections. We have a short window before the summer recess of Knesset, a number of weeks, in fact, in which an attempt to bring the government down. Remember, in our system, you need a majority. You need 61 votes in favor of new elections. That means that 5 people from Netanyahu's coalition need to vote against the coalition. Will it happen? Maybe. The 2 ultra-Orthodox parties in the coalition supported the deal with Hamas that President Biden presented a week and a half ago. As opposed to Netanyahu and the other far right-wing members of the government, maybe the ultra-Orthodox will bring the government down. There's a chance that Ben-Gvir, the right-wing fascist, the most dangerous person in the Israeli government, might decide, because he's doing so well in the polls, that he will bring the government down and bring us to new elections. So there is a chance, there is a hope. There's no doubt that many of us, like I, are not only praying for this to happen, but are working hard for it to happen. Mr. Netanyahu is the most dangerous person to the state of Israel in the state of Israel.
Thank you. I know we're running a little late, but I just want Frank Miller Small to unmute himself, and while he's doing that, Joan, I have a question for you. Afterwards, we might not have Q&A because our IT person has to go. There's nothing we can do about that, right? Okay, so this will be the last question. Frank? I saw your hand.
First of all, Gershon, thank you so much for sharing your perspective on the current situation. I so admire the work that you've been doing and continue to do in pursuit of peace, and particularly during this extraordinarily challenging time. I'm wondering if you could tell us in specific terms what we as Americans can do to support the peace process, the way it's would ideally unfold, the way you see it at this point.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time for the United States also, because the election clock is ticking loud and fast. And there might be actually an opportunity to knock some sense into Joe Biden. If we want to advance peace in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine, we need to make Palestine real to the Palestinians. They need to know that it's not empty talk. They've heard for 30 years peace process and two-state solution, and it needs to be real. 2 weeks ago, 5 countries, OECD members, recognized the state of Palestine after they too, for 30 years, have been talking about it. Spain and Ireland and Norway and Slovenia, and I forgot what the 5th was. There are more on the way of European countries that will recognize the state of Palestine. If Joe Biden wants to win the elections in November, he's got to change his policy on Israel. Jews who support Israel are going to continue to vote. 3 out of 4 American Jews vote Democratic. And they will vote Democratic. They will vote for Biden. 1 out of 4 will vote for Trump. I don't understand that, but that is what is. Christian fundamentalists won't vote for Joe Biden. In states like Michigan, where you have a huge American Arab population, they won't vote for Trump. They simply won't vote. And many of the young people in America and minorities in America who are dismayed by US blanket support of Israel in this war will also stay away from the polls. And if they do, Biden is going to lose. So I think this is something that you all need to tell to your Democratic representatives and anyone who has influence in the Democratic Party. There needs to be a change of American policy on this war. Biden made a great speech in laying out a plan for a ceasefire and said this war has to end. If the United States wants this war to end, it simply has to notify Israel that it's not sending Israel any more bombs. It can make that conditional, that if Israel is attacked by Iran or attacked by Hezbollah in Lebanon, the United States will have Israel's back and will continue to send bombs to Israel. But there should be no more American bombs falling on Palestinians in Gaza. And Israel does not have an unlimited supply of bombs to drop on Gaza. So it would need to make its calculations on how much more it has to drop on Gaza before ending the war. So that's something the United States can do to put an end to this war, is notify Israel, no more bombs, and recognize the state of Palestine. And I think it's important to end this war, and it's important to deliver the message that the two-state solution is real. The United States can also encourage all the states around the world that have not yet recognized the state of Israel to do so. There are 193 member states of the United Nations. 165 of them recognize the state of Israel. About 146 of them recognize the state of Palestine. All 193 member states of the United Nations need to recognize both the state of Israel and the state of Palestine, and now is the time to do it.
Thank you. I'm going back on my word, and I am going to ask one more speaker to ask a question. So come on up. Carrie.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. The last time I was at a different location, and I was the last speaker, I said that asked the audience if they would bid to take my spot to be the last speaker, and they enjoyed that idea. So what I was wondering is what the residents of Gaza know and understand. Do the residents of Gaza know and understand what happened on October 7th? And then following that, do they know and understand that the actions of Israel were in response to that? And do they know and understand that if they found a way to release the hostages, the bombs would stop?
So, quite honestly, we don't really know what the people of Gaza know and what they don't know. I can give you my impressions, my assessment, my analysis. My assessment and analysis is that just as the people of Israel don't know what kind of humanitarian disaster Israel has created in Gaza, the people of Gaza don't know the atrocities that Hamas committed in Israel on October 7th. We don't watch the same television, we don't see the same pictures, we don't hear the same story, we don't have leaders who are telling us the same things. They know that what they do know is that they are being bombed and killed, that Gaza is being destroyed by Israel. They don't understand why. I would say that at this point, most people in Gaza do not support Hamas and blame Hamas a great deal for what they brought on them. They cannot vocalize that. They cannot take to the streets and demonstrate against Hamas. Hamas will kill them. It's very difficult in conflict situations. Look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You put an Israeli and a Palestinian in the room, they have two completely different historical narratives. Even though we've been at this for 76 years, we have completely different outlooks on who's responsible, who's to blame, who is the guilty side, who is fighting for justice and who is fighting against justice. And that's not necessarily during a wartime period. This is for 76 years. So I think it's quite unreasonable to expect the Israelis and Hamas to have the same view on the current war and understand what's actually at play here. It'll take many, many years before there is any kind of truth and reconciliation where we can look at each other in the face and take responsibility for the horrific things that we've done and demand responsibility from the other side of the horrific things that they have done. So no, I don't think that they know what's going on, just as I don't think that Israelis understand that 200 people were killed in Gaza yesterday to rescue 4 Israeli hostages. And if Israelis do know it, they don't really care. Just as I think that people who are being bombed on have a difficult time feeling empathy for people who are dropping the bombs.
Gershon, thank you. Thank you for coming and talking to us. It was our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.